When you think about the LA punk scene, you have to talk about one band that just burned hotter, faster, and way more dangerously than anyone else. I mean, these guys were barely musicians. Their shows were basically riots. And well, their story ends in some real tragedy. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the legendary self-destructive force that was the Germs. Just listen to this quote. This is from Don Bowles, the guy who would become their most famous drummer. And it pretty much says everything you need to know about the reaction the Germs got from day one. There was absolutely no middle ground. You either thought they were brilliant or you were just completely horrified. And honestly, that's exactly what they were going for.
All right, so how on earth does a band like that even start? Well, for the Germs, it wasn't about musical dreams. Nope, it started with a shared knack for just causing trouble. Get this, the future frontman Darby Crash and guitarist Pat Smear got kicked out of high school for supposedly using mind control on other students. So what do you do next? Obviously, you start a band. They roped in Lorna Doom on bass, and for a hot minute, believe it or not, Belinda Carlisle, from the Go-Go's, was supposed to be their drummer. She got mono and never actually played a show, so they got Donna Rhea instead. This was a band built purely on attitude, not ability. Seriously, most of them could barely even play.
And this quote from Pat Smear, it perfectly paints the picture of their first live show. It wasn't really a concert. It was more like 5 minutes of pure performance art designed to get a reaction. Peanut butter on the mic, red licorice everywhere. It was just total unformed chaos. The actual music? Yeah, that felt like an afterthought. But here's where it gets really weird. The disconnect between the noise they were making and what they actually liked to listen to. When Don Bowles first met them, he figured they'd be into some really out there experimental stuff. But nope, Pat Smear told him he loved Queen and that his favorite guitarist was Steve Howe from the super prog rock band Yes. It's this bizarre contradiction that just made them even more of an enigma. And this just says it all. When they finally managed to record their first single in Pat's garage, it was so raw, so completely abrasive, that the pressing plant literally sent the records back with a warning sticker they made up. This record may cause ear cancer. I mean, how much more punk rock can you get? They had made something that was genuinely considered dangerous. So as the band started playing in actual clubs, you'd think maybe they'd clean up their act a little? No way. That initial chaos didn't get polished. It became the main event. Their live shows turned into these legendary, full-blown spectacles. So you gotta be asking, what was actually happening on stage that got them this wild reputation? I mean, what were people really lining up to see? Well, it was a complete spectacle of self-destruction. Darby Crash would just relentlessly taunt the crowd, he'd roll around in broken glass, he'd start massive food fights. He even admitted in the famous documentary The Decline of Western Civilization that he would get hurt on purpose, just to, and I quote, keep from being bored. A Germs show wasn't just music, it was a totally volatile and unpredictable event. And the insanity wasn't just limited to the stage. Oh no. They were shooting a music video for Lexicon Devil with this really eccentric director. And as Don Bowles tells it, the director gets into an argument with Darby, suddenly throws up everywhere, pulls out a gun, and starts shooting holes in the ceiling of the bar. That was just the world the Germs lived in. So how in the world do you capture that kind of chaos on an album? Well, you bring in a rock and roll legend. Joan Jett, who was a huge fan, was brought in to produce their one and only studio album, called GI. And somehow, she brought just enough focus to harness all that wild energy into what became one of the first real hardcore punk albums. Of course, their reputation followed them right into the studio. Darby even wrote a lyric about Joan being passed out on the couch during the sessions. The release of GI and their appearance in that famous documentary, this was really the peak of their visibility. But as you can probably guess, it was also the beginning of the end. The very chaos that made them famous was about to tear them apart. Yeah, their live shows were forever captured in Penelope Sferise's incredible documentary, The Decline of Western Civilization. For so many people outside of LA, this film was their first glimpse into the raw energy, the violence, and the nihilism that really defined the Germs. It absolutely cemented their status as legends. But being that notorious comes with a price. According to Don Bowles, the LAPD basically started threatening any club owner who dared to book them. So they were pretty much banned in their own city. They had to start playing secret shows under the name GI, which stood for Germs Incognito. And this is where the story gets just completely ironic. Darby Crash, the mastermind of all the onstage chaos, fired Don Bowles for being too chaotic. Can you believe it? The band that was literally built on anarchy couldn't handle its own anarchy. And just like that, the Germs were done. Now, shortly after they broke up, Darby decided to put on one last reunion show. He said it was to put punk into perspective, but what was going on behind the scenes was much, much darker. This is where the story takes a really tragic turn. At that final sold-out show, Darby got on the mic and said these words to the crowd. It's so chilling to hear now because no one in that audience could have possibly known just how literally he meant it. Just 4 days later, on December 7th, 1980, Darby Crash was dead from an intentional heroin overdose. He was only 22 years old. He died as part of a suicide pact with a friend of his, Casey Cola. She survived, and her story really cuts through a lot of the myths that grew around his death. There's this legend that he posed himself like he was on a cross. But she says, no, that's not what happened. As she so heartbreakingly put it, I woke up in the arms of a dead man. His arms were around me. And then, in just one last tragic twist of fate, the news of his death was almost completely buried because the very next day, John Lennon was murdered. Darby's death became a footnote, something only talked about in the punk underground, which, in a way, is what cemented his status as this ultimate cult figure. But the story doesn't just stop there. Even after that violent, abrupt ending, the band left behind this surprisingly powerful and really long-lasting legacy. Think about this. Pat Smear went from being this punk rock outcast to actual rock royalty. He played guitar for two of the biggest bands in the world, Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. Don Bowles became a legend in the LA scene. Then in 2007, a biopic about the band came out, which led to reunion tours with the actor Shane West singing for Darby. The Germs' chaotic echo just proved impossible to silence. Which really leaves us with one big, final question. The Germs were a band totally defined by their own chaotic, destructive impulses. It's what made them exciting, what made them dangerous, and it's what ultimately destroyed them. So was that self-destruction the very thing that made sure they'd never be forgotten? It's a tough one, and I'm really curious to know what you all think.